It is my special privilege to introduce Dr. Yulia Matveyeva, the author of a wonderful book, Decorative Fabrics in the Mosaics of Ravenna. Our meeting today is not going to be just a presentation on the book. She is going to share us with some of her knowledge and expertise on the subject, and generally embroidery in antiquity and other types of liturgical fabrics. In order to prevent various mishaps, I have muted all of the participants except for the host, which would be myself, and Dr. Yulia Matveyeva, who will be sharing her screen with us. If you'll have questions, and I hope that you will, and many, during this session, please send them in chat. I'm going to read them to Dr. Yulia Matveyeva after her lecture. And then also at the end, we'll have an opportunity to turn the microphones on, and you'll be able to ask her questions directly, whatever it is that you like. So also you can get information if you'd like her presentation to order her book, which is quite unique and interesting, and it was just recently translated into English and available for general distribution. But without taking too much of the time from the presentation, Dr. Yulia Matveyeva talking to us from Kharkiv in Ukraine, so it's already getting late there. I will give the microphone an opportunity to speak to her, and we'll be enjoying her presentation. Again, thank you very much for coming. I want to remind you that we conducting educational lectures in 2 languages, in Russian on Mondays and Thursdays, and in English on Sundays. Times vary, but inescapably we have some very interesting material. Our next lectures in English will be next Sunday, presentation by Dr. Mohammed Al-Assarat from Petra on Christian legacy in late antiquity in city of Petra in Jordan. After that, we are going to speak to Dr. John Henry from Princeton University, graduate from Princeton University, on the excavations in Tel El Megiddo in Israel, and finding perhaps the oldest known church. And also there are many other presentations, but I'm not going to spoil our schedule, not to give our secrets, to keep the intrigue going. But please put it in your schedule, keep checking our page, and announcement will be coming in due time. Meanwhile, thank you very much for coming. Yulia, please, microphone and presentation is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for introduction. And I am going to present you my book today. It's Decorative Fabrics in the Mosaics of Ravenna, Semantic and Cultural Context. For me, this book is really treasure because it's not only informative, but also very beautiful. And this book has originally been published in Russian 4 years ago, and the first edition has already been sold during my lectures in Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. So, and finally, we have the English edition, which I am happy to present. And I was thinking about the best way, how can I give you the idea of my book. And I decided to tell you just a little piece of my research. But let me first of all give you a better idea of how I have arrived at this theme. I'm not only a historian of art, but I'm also actually a textile artist. For the past 20 years, I have been a researcher of Byzantine art and textiles. But now I understand that I have been a textile artist since my childhood. My grandmother was famous in Kharkiv for her unique textile works. And I have seen from my childhood And I know from my own experience how long does it take to do such delicate work, how concentrated and disciplined you should be, and how determined and patient you must be for hours and hours doing this. For me to be able to walk like this, I must have a higher purpose. So my soul needs to dedicate my work to something holy and eternal. That's what brought me to church textiles. For example, like this. My art was exhibited in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Kiev, and Minsk, and received several awards. So church textiles function not only as an image, but also have a particular application in the liturgy. Textiles in church always at least have double meaning, a symbolic meaning and the meaning of the object. In order for an artist to create an object for a church, he must be aware of all its meanings. If he's not aware, he can only copy. And that is, I think, where we are now. As the creator, I am very saddened about it. With my academic work, I am making an attempt to get this meaning back into conscience of contemporary artists. So some examples of my work and the process, how does it go from just drawing to the real work. It helped me to see in mosaics not just images, but real textiles, because I have seen the same process always in my own experience. And that is why I believed that everything, all textiles which we can see in church art, in mosaics, they have real prototypes. So the mosaics of the churches in Ravenna, such as Orthodox baptistry and the Arian baptistry, the Basilica of Santo Apollinare Nuovo, Santo Apollinare Nuovo, and Basilica Santo Apollinare in Classe. The Mausoleum of Galla Placidia, and the Basilica of San Vitale. They are world famous. They were largely commissioned by the Emperor Justinian in the 6th century and are one of the glories of ancient world. In this in this mosaic, we can see really miracle because they have survived. Everybody is familiar with the images of the mosaics, but their deeper meaning is hidden. It is that meaning I want to talk to you about today. The fabrics that appear in the mosaics are traditionally seen simply as decorative pieces. However, they have deep symbolic meaning that would have been clear to every educated person of that time. To understand that meaning, we have to look at the use and meaning of the fabrics in both biblical and classical contexts. Without grasping that meaning, it's impossible to understand the meaning of mosaics. I have based this paper on the mosaics themselves and on the texts concerning fabrics in the Hebrew Bible and Greek classical texts. We are going to have a look at these two mosaics in altar. They are in altar opposite each other. You can see them here. It's important because they are connected to each other by the people who are on them. They are not usual icons with biblical plots, but they concern two very famous historical figures, the Empress Theodora and Justinian the Great. We will talk mostly about Theodora, but it's impossible without Justinian. Let's look at this image. This is the group portrait of Empress Theodora and the imperial court in the Church of San Vitale in Ravenna. What can the meaning of textile tell us about the Empress? What kind of information can be given to us by pieces of fabrics? Actually, Theodora in this picture is surrounded by fabrics like cloth and curtains. There are a lot of them. A curtain starts this picture and finishes it. Why? Are they only decorative details because the artist had difficulties with composition, or just something to show the richness of the empress and court? If that is so, why does the left curtain take up a quarter of entire composition, while the people are in a compact group? Is it on purpose or by mistake? In the early church, each detail had sense and deep symbolic meaning, especially the position of the image and the amount of space it occupied. Given the high skills of the mosaic masters of the 6th century, mistakes like these were impossible. They were virtuosos of their art. That is why everything that they did on purpose. So let's start to read and decode the textiles as they were used in Theodora's time. Here in picture, we decode their meaning from the left to right as it in the portrait. So the first fabric is the fabric which is a dog veil. It's on the left corner of composition. The reading of the plot depends on understanding of the function and placement of this veil. Since the Empress goes to the entrance carrying in her hands the chalice, her imperial gift to the temple. Earlier researchers believed that Theodora is going to the choir, the gallery on the top floor, a place where women stayed during the liturgy. My research shows that this hypothesis doesn't agree with the fact that the Empress is bringing to the temple a gift which has to be transferred to the altar. We know that from the ceremony of the bringing of imperial gifts. So the precise description of the ceremony of bringing imperial gifts relates to the emperor, but not to the empress. In texts, we know just this part of information, but also the text from the texts we know that empresses also brought gifts. We just don't know the details of ritual. So the details of this ritual aren't given, and Theodora's portrait is the only source of this deed, which is often mentioned to confirm it. To understand what is represented by the veil in front of the Empress, I investigate which moment exactly of the ceremony of the bringing of gifts is pictured in the mosaic with Theodora paralleled with Justinian's portrait. The description of the ceremony of the bringing of gifts by the emperor is compared with a scene in the mosaic, and it becomes clear that in Justinian's portrait, several different actions of the ritual occurring at different times are presented. The emperor's entrance to the temple, we know that because Justinian has crown here, and after entering, usually Vasilevs took it out. Then the emperor's meeting with Archbishop and clergy. We can see here Archbishop Maximus, Maximianus, and diacons. A procession to the altar accompanied by young noblemen in ceremonial armor. They are here. And the bringing of a gift in the altar space, because the chalice was in the hands of emperor only in the space of altar. So the choice of events in the image with Justinian give us an example from which the action of the ritual could be deduced in Theodora's scene. Defining of the analogies of differences reveals that in her scene, only two moments are obviously present. A procession to the altar accompanied by the court, and the bringing of gifts, which by analogy with the emperor had to happen and at the altar. So at the altar, but Theodora is a woman. Could she enter the altar? According to the rules, the entrance to the altar has been forbidden to laymen and women. However, at the time of Theodora, there were some exceptions, such as diaconesses by their right of priesthood and persons of imperial blood. They could enter an altar with the gifts intended for God. Theodora wasn't diaconessa. However, Justinian had raised her to the emperor's level, having given her many corresponding rights. In San Vitale, she is represented in the altar on the equal terms with Justinian, and the presence of the image of the imperial person in Byzantium was equated to her personal presence. In the history of Byzantium and Byzantine art, Theodora is the only empress or any other royal or high-ranking woman whose portrait was directly placed in an altar. And her image in the Holy of Holies in San Vitale is not only only one case of her image in an altar. Theodora has been presented on equal terms with Justinian also in the altar space on a veil of ciborium in Hagia Sophia of Constantinople. And she was also pictured there as the empress bearing gifts. I show you a reconstruction of the ciborium. We know about that from texts. And on sides of this, you can see three parts. In the middle part, there was Christ with apostles, and asides, there were on one side of the ciborium, there was Christ blessing Justinian and Theodora, and on the other side, there was Virgin blessing them. On the low band, there were imperial gifts. Also, this topic of bringing gifts. But gifts were very luxurious and very big. It was, as you see, buildings which they dedicate to God, and the people also as to God, such as churches, hotels, and hospitals. The position of the Theodora image was actually at the same place as here, but on ciborium. Then, presence of portraits of Theodora as donator in an altar meant that she could enter the altar space if she was bringing gifts. Thus, the veil opened in front of the queen in the portrait in San Vitale leads to the altar. Investigation of the ritual shows that it's the entrance to the altar, but the view of the door seems to be very ordinary. Could it be the entrance to a sacred and holy place like an altar? The entrance curtain seems to be very simple, without very luxurious pattern such as would be fit for a holy imperial veil. But this kind of pattern had a very special meaning. So, about the pattern on the veil. The pattern on the veil in front of Theodora contains special symbols. Which ones? The pattern of the ornament consists of something that looks like 4 flowers petals, 4 flower petals divided by a green cross. There are some of them dark in color, possibly purple, certainly not black. We see them hardly ever in, for example, Coptic textiles. And from Coptic textiles, we know that they are not black because we did chemical analysis of colors, and it's purple color. And there are others, often seen as terracotta or red in colors. And you can see them everywhere from mosaics. There are a lot of examples you can see of these flowers. And here, from the mosaics to textiles, we've got real textiles with these ornaments, and also textiles in mosaics. Look, there are a lot of them. These elements, which look like petals with a cross, have been considered in details in my book and presented in the special part in it. But now I just tell you a little information about them to understand the meaning of curtain in front of Theodora, because they are very, very important for this curtain to understanding of its meaning. So their symbols has an ancient origin. During the classical period, it was hollyhock or mallow flowers, which presented the most simple and useful and healthy food, and which also was a medicine, and also the food which dead people could eat to come to life. The big number of references to this flower appear in diverse sources: texts on funeral cults, philosophy, medicine, and even cookery. For example, it's attributed to Pythagoras that he actually placed the mallow at the center of the universe. It's said that he began his conversation with his pupils every time with the same words, saying, "The most sacred thing in the world is the leaf of a mallow. The wisest is number. And after this, the person who have named all things." Hesiod speaks about a mallow already in the first lines of the poem Works and Days. He writes, "Fools, they know not how much more the half is than the whole, nor what great advantage there is in mallow and asphodel." Now it's difficult to understand what does it mean. But even in medieval time, it was also difficult to understand. And people started to research this topic. And now we can see explanation in one schalaya, medieval schalaya for Hesiod. In this schalaya, these lines of Hesiod are commented in following manner. Quotation. The simplest food which we can eat is a mallow and asphodelus. From them we receive juice which is used in food. There is a lot of advantage in them, and more than in the most magnificent dishes which do harm, or in the most prosperous life. So says Hesiod. Possibly he speaks it from his own experience. Jeremy, in the composition about 7 wise men, speaks about it as the food satisfying hunger. Gerodor remembers it satisfying hunger as well in the 5th book, Word about Heracles. Platon, in the 3rd book of Laws, says that Epimenides spent the whole day without sustenance and food, using something small and edible instead, and it has been made from asphodelus and mallow, and it satisfied his hunger and thirst. The end of quotation. With the arrival of Christian era, flowers began to symbolize the food of resurrection and the life which Christ gives us with communion bread, Christ's body. The association of mallow with bread leads to stylization of mallow as bread in the form of a circle or a circle with a cross, or two images of the flower in the context similar to bread. Let me show that. We can compare, for example, flowers in a basket from a Coptic veil of the 6th century and bread in catacomb mural. Look, they are basically the same, and even the number of flowers and breads are the same. Look, there are 5 of them because it's allusion for multiplication of bread, Eucharistic theme in the early Christian art. Or images of a circle with a cross in communion bread, and at the same place, image of mallow, also on communion bread. Another example, when 2 large flowers are located in the Eucharistic context of resurrection on an equal basis with the grape wine. There are a lot of also examples. Here on the top, and here grape wine. And frequently it's together with peacocks immortality symbols. But not only illustrations show the connection of mallow and bread. It's reflected in the names of the flower itself. These names have the same general lexical roots with the word bread in different tongues, and cultures. For example, these words are closely related in Hebrew. The mallow with borrowed malva is called halamis and bread lechem. In Arabic, those two words also have the same root. Bread is hoops and malva is hubeza. This form of word, hubeza, means little bread. So they have the same root. And in Russian and Ukrainian, one of the synonyms of mallow, we've got a name of this flower as mallow, but also there is synonym, and it is not just bread, but namely communion bread. We call it prasfornik. In Russian, the communion bread is called prasfora. The same in Greek, but with the same as in Greek, but with another stress. In Greek, it's prospera. Other term in Russian for this flower is also connected with bread. It's kalachik, means little bread. So let's return to the images. What was added by the image of mallow as bread into them? First of all, it is the active preaching of the main idea of salvation started by Christ. I remind you some quotation. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread, he shall live forever. And the bread that I will give is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. John 6:51. Or, then Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, except ye eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, ye have no life in you. Whoso eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood has eternal life, and I will rise him up at the last day. For my flesh is meat indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He that eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood dwells in me, and I in him. As the living Father has sent me, and I live by the Father, so he that eateth me, even he shall live by me. This is that bread which came down from heaven, not as your fathers did it manna and are dead. He that eateth of this bread shall live forever. John 6:55-58. Why is the mallow image preferred to bread? Because such images spoke for pagans as such. The mallow, which you considered resurrection food, was a prototype of the real heavenly bread, Christ's flesh. The mallow revived you ancestors for a while, only when they ate it, but Christ gives you life eternal. The image of a mallow as bread was also confession, a particular rejection of paganism. Therefore, the mallow begins to be represented near a cross, as we see here and in other examples. Near a cross, very close, on on the very important place up. And other examples also you can see here. There are a lot of them. Or mellow covered with the lines of a cross to give it Christian context. Also, there are a lot of examples. And here I find how did they do that. Usually mallow in life has 5 petals, but in design we see 4 to make it closer to Christ, to make it symbol, not only food, but food which Christ gives. And it was useful to take real petals and put it. And I tried to repeat this kind of this kind of living symbols. It's real mellow, and you can see it's absolutely the same that we can see in pictures. So such species of a flower emphasized its similarity even more with the real bread when it's divided. Look, we can see them as flowers and as a real circle, and they are very similar with bread divided into 4 or 8 parts. Here 4 parts, very similar with images of mallows. It's, we can compare with real bread. And here 8 parts. The biggest distribution of images of a mallow in Christian iconography falls between the 4th and the 6th century, which covered the time of the creation of the mosaics in Ravenna. A close correlation between mallow and bread is reinforced by the depiction of similar flowers on communion bread. Some of them look identical to the drawing on the veil in front of Theodora. I mean this one, look. This on bread and this on the curtain. So flowers, breads are symbols of the resurrection and the new life with Christ appeared very frequently in objects which are the border between life and death, such as burial cloth. All these examples are from this kind of cloth. This one, sarcophagi, murals, you can see them, and mosaics of funeral chambers, shrouds and veils. They will signify new life revival, and transition to the kingdom of heaven, or to the Holy of Holies. They appear in a large number on objects and in architectural details of entrances to sacred space. In temples, these symbols of resurrection decorate liminal space, like a transition from the earthly world to heavenly, from a lower case to a top, from a house to the altar, to the kingdom of heaven and to the Holy of Holies. Thus, the drawing on a veil in front of Theodora says that this fabric is definitely designed for marking the border of Holy of Holies and an altar. So it was part about first curtain, and near it there is very important thing. It's an image of spring. One more important element of the mosaic, indicating Theodora's intention to enter the altar, is an image of a spring or the fountain in front of the veil. The image almost completely belongs to the space of the open door, except for the bottom of a column. It is actually on the path of the Empress. On the path of the Empress. So it seems Theodora is heading for it and for a door. There is an assumption that it is the fountain for washing. But if it is so, then Theodora's purpose is not bringing the gift to the altar, but only the fountain for washing. That seems impossible in the context of the mosaic. The fountain is located in the foreground, even more than the Empress bringing communion vessel, and even before the door leading to the altar. It belongs completely to the space of the altar door, signifying the world where Theodora is heading to with the gift. What does the spring represent in especially allocated sacred space mean? For example, like here in the altar or under a ciborium. Usually it is an allusion for the source of eternal life, Christ's symbol. Such reading corresponds also with the general semantic context of the mosaic. Theodora goes to the source of eternal life, to Christ, to that only one for whom her gift is intended. There is nothing else in the composition which is brought closer to its first line. It's possible to say that all characters are pushed to the background in comparison with the spring. It becomes evident when this plot is compared with Justinian portrait. Here it's on contrary. on all characters are as close as possible to the first line of composition. It can be also used as evidence of the great importance given to the fountain and explain the significance of the place in the composition. The symbol of a spring of eternal life is undoubtedly that goal towards which the Empress is heading. Her movement is directed not just to a door, but to the spring ahead. She and the spring are two most important highlights of composition. That is especially well seen when looking at the view of the general plan of composition. Look, the bottom of the spring and all other personages. However, that is why probably the image of the fountain is placed also before the veil. The veil being less significant, even though it has to be in front of it, according to formal logic. However, in iconography, important symbolical details often do not submit unusual ideas about space, and there are always exceptions made for them. Such treatment is repeatedly used, for example, in composition where a throne with ciborium is present, such as the communion of apostles or their meeting of the Lord. It is the usual way to show a hierarchy of objects. So the fountain symbolically reveals the main sense of the scene, the source of eternal life, Christ, worship of him, and the bringing of the highest imperial gift. Christ's image in the symbolical form of a spring allows us to see the main objective of the Empress that could not be seen in the context of an actual drawing of the ritual. But at the same time, it was the only purpose of all the procession, which was known at that time to everybody. So the main idea of the mosaic is to show the meaning of the bringing of the gift by Theodore. How was it possible to disclose that inner world which moved the Augusta? How was it possible to show something that eyes can't see? How have the creators dealt with this problem? They positioned the fountain and the Empress in the foreground. For this, they needed to organize a special place in the composition to give the fountain more space. Therefore, it's as if all the other characters are moved to the right, and none of them interfere with the door space. The effect only special attendant with one hand removes a veil, but his body doesn't enter to the zone of sacred space and the door. And now you can compare the composition And you can see that all personages are very close in Justinian portrait. They are on the foreground, and on the portrait of Theodora, on the foreground is only the spring, and all the other personages pushed to the background and to the right part. So the effect which this movement also gives, it is to add more space for the spring. And even veil, which is extremely important, is removed and does not touch the fountain. Look closely. It doesn't touch. The veil is also reduced in its size to make more space. Its lower side looks shorter than usual. It's lifted high because it's tied up in a large knot, which always shortens fabric's length. And here we should tell a couple of words about these knots. Knots on hanging fabrics also had a meaning. Knots like the one on the veil in front of Theodora are met with repeatedly. Did they really take place in church or in palace? We can see a lot of them. Let's imagine a real veil in a palace or in a church, or which covers any entrance or hangs on a ciborium. It's a big heavy fabric, which is usually decorated with embroidery or a textile pattern. To knot such fabric is very difficult, but it is possible. However, it is not practical at all. The fabric is rumpled. The process of knotting and untying can be difficult and doesn't look aesthetic. Under the weight of the fabric, the knot is tied very tightly and damages this fabric. Why are knots so often used on these veils? Could it have been tied in a different way? If we look at an image where the reverse side of the knot is visible, then we can see that it's not a usual knot. It has a loop behind. It has a loop behind. It's a so-called false or loopback knot. And I would like to demonstrate you, because it's really interesting. We can repeat it with textile and understand how it worked. Look, there I've got quite long piece of textile, and if I do usual knot, it is not comfortable. If I have a curtain, I would not be able to do that in a proper way. Hiding also very difficult and unesthetic. And look, with this loop back knot, it's very easy, just one moving. Look, here there is loop, here there is a usual knot, and very easy with untying. I show you again. Imagine it's a big curtain, and actually look, the length of fabric is less now because of loop. It is not usual knot. It takes place for a loop and very easy to untidy. And we return to images. Look. So the loop on the knot made the fabric of a veil shorter, and we can see that in examples too, not only our practice. Just a second, we are waiting for the next picture. Because, yes, look, here, curtains without these knots are very long, and curtains with loops are very, very short. And in other images, and here we can see the same. Veils with knots were used mainly as symbols of sacred boundary and were placed on entrances to sacred space and ciboriums. In such a context, on one hand, the false knot showed that with Christ's coming, the veil of the Holy of Holies and the kingdom of heaven are opened to the people. But on the other hand, it could be closed if the people who want to enter are not ready, if their spiritual state is not good, or if they act in a wrong way. Church history abounds with examples when the throne veil magically did not open, when the priest and diacons tried to open it, or it became as if embraced by flame, so it was not even possible to approach it. The knot on the veil in front of the Empress Theodora bearing gifts symbolically emphasizes the opening of the sacred border of the altar. So in the mosaic with Theodora, the veil in front of the Empress shows a possibility of an entrance in the altar for the bringing of the imperial gift. It's shown by the drawing of the veil, the large knot on it, the gesture of the grandee removing the veil, and especially the fountain spring stain in the foreground. And the middle part about the clothes of personages. They are in consonance with patterns on a veil. So after veil, you understand better this very little part. So most of women's garments have got the same motifs as the first curtain. Their daughter of the commander, Belisarius, here is she. She has on her cloak a gold symbol of bread flour. Other details of her garment are also supportive the idea of communion and resurrection. Her dark purple tunic is decorated with two white stripes of golden ornament, in which center there is a flower garland from the red flowers, reminding us buds or petals of hollyhocks, and it has a number of analogies in Coptic fabrics. Next lady is of Belisarius' wife. On her garment, there are two large signs of the bread, and they are also on foreground of tunic, and they presented as if lying on a big gold trays. And all her cloak is covered by symbols of bread flowers with the cross, which are identical with this symbol on many other cases. So the pattern of fabrics on the clothes of women we discussed. And what about Queen? Her clothes. The pattern of fabric on clothes of the Queen contains only one element which is common with the core of fabrics of the other ladies. It's the garland made from hollyhocks. It's here, little part. All the other images on her garments, on contrary, signify the ruler, extolling her position as that of the queen. The three kings bringing gifts to Christ are depicted on the magnificent purple with gold imperial cloak of Theodora. These images are traditional and can be seen on the other Ravenna mosaics in Sant Apollinare Nuovo, and we can compare them with images on Theodora's cloak. So the Empress Theodora is distinguished from all her attendees not only by the imperial regalia, but also the special inherent only to her subject of the bringing of the gifts by the three kings. Images on her clothes once again remind us that only she has the imperial dignity, and only she will pass further into the Holy of Holies. The Queen bearing gifts to Christ is surrounded with Eucharistic symbols. They are in front of her on the opening veil, and behind her on the clothes of the female attendants of the Empress. And the last part, the second veil in a scene with Theodora. This fabric represents the panel decorated with red, white, and blue stripes. The fabric is raised to the top. It is apparently the first fabric which has been passed the procession. The empress and two court ladies standing behind her already passed under the fabric, and the rest of the female group has stopped under it. To understand why the artist created these differences and the curtain above the women, we need to know their rituals which were associated with curtains like this. This curtain also is not just decorative detail. It gives sense to the group of the women and also tell us a story. In court ritual, very seldom, only on special occasions, were the curtains like this. In the book of ceremonies of the Byzantine court, a case is described when two silver columns were erected in hall without any architectural need. Then they hung a curtain on the columns and raised it up. Everything they did was for a very important delegation of ambassadors, and it was big privilege. Ambassadors had to enter, to go to the curtain, and then stand there under the veil during all the ceremony. This curtain was sign of their dignity, and at the same time it was also a border which they couldn't cross. And I think this is the case we can see on the mosaic with Theodora. It shows that behind the empress there are two first ladies, and behind them there is a delegation or a group of very important women from the court. So let's sum up the results. What have the fabric surrounding the empress told us? The veil in the beginning of the picture, the cloth in the center, a veil at the end of an icon were put in the mosaic on purpose. They allowed the creators of the mosaic to give us a number of historical nuances which are surprising in their precision. The subtleties of a developed hierarchy, the details of the ritual, the bringing of the gifts by the empress, the uniqueness of the entrance of Theodora and her ability to enter the altar. The drawings on the fabrics showed us the intentions of characters in the mosaic from their clothes. And we could see a living ritual of honorable location under the veil for the women from the empress's suite. How much did all these details matter for the patron of the mosaic, Theodora? From my point of view, the mosaic is not only the glorification of the empress, it's also testimony to her the most famous words. It is known that the most famous speech of the Empress Theodora was pronounced when the Augusta refused to flee the captured capital during the Nika riots. And this speech saved Justinian the Great and the whole empire. She said, the historian Procopius left us her words like this. She said, if you wish to save yourself, my lord, there is no difficulty. We are rich, our there is the sea, and yonder are their ships. Yet reflect for a moment whether, when you have once escaped to a place of security, you would not gladly exchange such safety for death. As for me, I agree with the adage that the royal purple is the noblest shroud. The royal purple is the noblest shroud. She is here in royal purple. These words were said in a minute of mortal danger. In this situation, they probably expressed their deepest internal beliefs of their empress. This portrait connected with that moment because this portrait was made at another difficult time for the empress, when she needed courage and determination again, because she was in the face of death. The mosaic was created approximately between 546-548. Theodora's life ended after a long and serious illness on June the 27th, 548. This portrait was not just usual portrait of glorification, but also a peculiar type of a bequest, a special prayer, the crowned donator bearing the burden of power and close to death. The portrait created during this period embodies probably the deepest desire of the empress to go to Christ into the kingdom of heaven with gifts and with royal favor. It was her main service. The sum of the life of the Empress Theodora is proclaimed in her most famous word. Royal purple is the noblest shroud, and it is transmitted in the portrait from San Vitale. So thank you very much for your attention, for your patience. I was given you just a little piece of my book. It's like, you see, it's like a detective story. And when you pull one thread, you can discover the whole story. And there are a lot of them, which we can find just from analyzing the symbolic of textiles. It's now I understand that it's really language which we can read. So thank you very much.
Yulia, thank you very much. I'm going to turn I didn't receive too many questions via chat, but I'm going to allow participants to unmute themselves by way of muting themselves. Everybody, once again, Yulia, could you please turn microphone on? Yes, thank you. I do have a couple of questions for you. And a couple of more general nature, and one is a little bit more specific about something that you mentioned in your lecture. And dear friends, please turn your cameras on perhaps, and if you'd like to ask questions, that'd be greatly appreciated. Of course, it's a unique opportunity to interact with Yulia. You mentioned about the similarities of the patterns and designs on the mosaics and fabrics, and we're talking exclusively about Ravenna, but obviously by examples, by extension, we see that it spills out of Ravenna through the entire Byzantine and even broader into Greco-Roman world.
Yes.
Can we say that there was a set patterns in general that was implied in not only in fabric and in mosaics, not only ecclesiastical space, but overall, that there were some prototypes, or as would say, catalogs of designs, if you wish, that were taken out and implemented either on the walls or on the fabric?
Yes, so yes, we can say that it was general for all kinds of art. And in the beginning, it wasn't in Christian art. It was in paganism also, but they put inside another meaning. And Christian epoch uh, change this with putting above the cross, or putting near the image of this flower cross. So in my book, I dedicated to these two texts about these two images, very big part, and actually it's my favorite part. There are all texts that you can check, and all quotation about this, and examples in different parts. There is part about period of paganism and Christian period, and there are a lot of other cases. For example, very interesting case when these symbols are on the curtains on the Theodoric Palace. Why do they put on these curtains exactly these symbols? And you can see that on the cover on my book. With these curtains, the story is also very, very exciting, because there was no curtains in the beginning. So when they put these curtains exactly with this design, they change the meaning of this building. So I will not to tell everything, because when I start, it's difficult to stop me. Sorry.
Okay.
It's
So
beginning of the other story.
another question is, those ancient fabrics, we know that many of them were embroidered in different forms. Some were knitted, some were embroidered, but also we know there were painted fabrics, although of course paint on the fabric does not survive quite as well. From your research, what would you say? Were there mostly embroideries, or there were mostly stencil painting on the fabric, on the surface of the fabric? What was predominant? What was predominant technique in manufacturing the such curtains and fabrics and such?
Most of them is as usual textile, and their pattern was created during their making this
weaving,
fabric.
during the weaving.
Yes.
So it's not an embroidery even, they were weaved that way.
Yes, and all first textiles were like this, and we've got not just examples of these in museums, but also we've got description describing of this technique. For example, when we read about curtain in Siberium in Hagia Sophia. We know from the poem about Hagia Sophia, even the everything about threads, the technology of threads, and the kinds of weaving and patterns, a lot of information. Can you imagine 50 lines in poems dedicated just curtains?
Okay, and one question, and you may have addressed it. I had to stop for a couple of minutes, and forgive me if I'll ask you to repeat this, or maybe you didn't talk about it. You demonstrated how to put a knot in a curtain and how easy it is to make it and how easy it is to unfold. On Mosaics in Ravenna and somewhere else, we see two types of opening of the space, so to say. And certain places curtains are pulled to the sides.
Yes.
Maybe not on the top, but only like toward the lower part, lower middle. And in some places they, are not made of it, and they hang sort of right in the middle.
Yes.
What would be the difference? Is there a symbolism particular, or just the way that it happens? Yes.
Actually,
So
we've got
and
these.
on front of the picture, you will see curtains pulled to the sides, but also there are two knots. But in certain areas, there are knots. They're just pulled to the sides, like in a theater,
Yes.
like in modern times. So what is the difference?
Yes. Curtains like this means that the enter is closed.
The enter is closed.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And look, here there is here
Hand, yeah. Mm-hmm.
hand. Yes. So in the beginning, here there was Theodoric and his court.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was that Theodoric is entered, is going from his palace, because the shape of this building is basically the same as the palace of Theodoric, which is in Ravenna. Ruins, just part of this palace. But we can understand that it was this building they wanted to say. And then when Ravenna and Theodoric was Arian, and he was heretic. And when Ravenna got Byzantine Orthodox, they decided to change. And how to change this. How many minutes have I got?
We have no limit necessarily.
Okay. Okay. So, and they decided how to change it. There was a very easy way, for example, to take pieces of mosaics just from faces and change, for example, face of Theodoric on the face of Justinian. But they didn't do that. They took huge pieces of mosaics and with all figures, and put instead their curtains. It means there was their very important reason why they did it. So there, if we look at all the wall, when we enter, it's on the right, and in the beginning there is palace of Theodoric. We call it like this, and after that, martyrs, they go to the altar to Christ. Means in the beginning, in the end of this procession, there was Theodoric. And when they changed his portrait and portraits of his court all with curtains, they changed the meaning. It became the enter to the Holy of Holies, and the main entrance is opened. It means when you enter, you are invited to follow in if you are ready. And some of curtains are closed to remind that for heretic, this enter is closed. And to remind it, they left hands. And actually, they rededicated this church to the other saint. they dedicated the church to Saint. Wait, I forget. Yeah, to
Are we talking about Saint Apollinarius?
yes, they dedicated, yes, but they dedicated to other, to Saint who was famous as a fighter with heretic. We should talk something else, and I remember.
It's okay, don't worry.
Okay. When I change languages, sometimes I forget names.
Okay, well, there are many compliments on your presentation.
Thank you very much.
And interest in purchasing in your book and such. But again, dear friends, if you have any questions for Dr.
St. Martin.
St. Martin. So if you have any questions, please, this is time to ask. You can turn microphone on and ask the question or send them via text. Meanwhile, we have mainly just compliments. So thank you so much, and thank you for a wonderful presentation. Maybe we'll see you again with some other things, with another chapter from your book, or maybe presentation something else.
I would like to propose you. There are other topic which is really very interesting and useful for all Christian. It's about baptistry and textiles in baptistries, because they recover their early ritual of this.
That'd be phenomenal. Well, then we'll be in touch. Well, if there are no more questions, again, multiple thank you, Yulia, for your presentation. Thank you so very much. Thank you very much, all our guests, for attending. Please follow the announcements on our Facebook page about the upcoming lectures. We have quite a set of very interesting presentations on ancient Christian subject matters prepared for you. So please keep coming, and thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. We learned quite a bit. So you be well and stay healthy and stay well, and hope to see all of you again.
Thank you.
God bless. Thank you.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.